guys, and welcome back to another video. This has been so highly requested, especially since I made my how I got so much work experience video and have talked about, where I've worked in the past. Everybody seems to want to know what my CV and what my covering letter is like and tips for doing a good one. So that's what this video is about today. For context, I have just finished my undergraduate law degree at the University of York. I'm now studying for a master's at King's College London in medical ethics and law. In the past, I've applied for so much work experience. I'll link the video here about all the places that I've worked, but basically they range from like banking to corporate law, the civil service, teaching, marketing, and medicine. So my CV has basically got me in a lot of doors, and I want to share the tips to you guys so you guys can do the same. So I'm going to firstly talk about CVs, and I'm also going to show you mine, and then I'm going to talk about covering letters, and then also show you my covering letter that I would typically write. So let's just jump right straight into the video. So the first thing to note about a CV is that the average recruiter spends 6 seconds looking at it. So it has to stand out, and it has to draw them in, and it has to be easy to read, because if it's chunky, if you can't make out the key information, they're not going to bother. That's it, you will not get that role. So it has to make a very good first impression. Now, the way that I normally do this is by good subheadings. This depends as well on the field that you're going into and kind of what job it is. The way I set my CV out for medicine and law is I firstly put at the top education, so the degrees and what I've studied and the grades that I've got, and also any competitions, scholarships, or societies and things that I was in whilst I was there, just to show a bit more about me. Then I go on to experience, so my actual work experience that I've had, or any jobs that I've had, and then I go into volunteer work that's relevant, with finally ending off with like an about me, hobbies, more information section, which gives a few lines just saying what I like to do in my spare time, any language skills, my first aid qualifications, things like that. So the best way to set out these subheadings is use a good title, good, clear, easy to read fonts. Make sure the font is uniform throughout the whole CV. It's okay to use a bit of colour to make it stand out. I used to have like a slightly blue subheading, which kind of is a bit different, but at the same time, everything else is in black and white, just so it makes it easy to read. It's also worth noting that some career fields might want a personal profile section, the bit at the start when you're like, I'm a driven young individual that seeks ambition, rah, rah, rah. Yeah, some want that. I mean, law and medicine typically don't, and they're the fields that I know the most about, so I've never really had one at the top. I also feel like those personal profiles are quite redundant. If the skills in which you mention in the personal profile are exemplified throughout the CV, then it kind of just repeats it twice and it's wasted space, so I normally don't bother. But some fields will want that, so just look into the field and Google, a typical CV template in that field and see whether they use it or not. Another important thing to note is about the actual experience that you include and the volunteer things that you include. So only include things that are relevant to that role. So for example, me doing medicine, I'm going to include all the relevant work experience that I've had in hospitals, doctors' practices, when I've gone to open days for certain, med schools or conferences with med schools, but also there are roles that I've done that you won't think are directly relevant but have relevant skills. For example, if I've worked in customer service, or I've worked with young people, or worked with a certain charity that involves talking to different diverse people, then those skills are directly relevant to medicine, even though the experience isn't in that field. But at the same time, experience what I've had about video editing isn't relevant to medicine, so I'm going to not include that. So it's about trimming down your experiences and seeing which ones are relevant, and only picking the best, most relevant ones for that field. I also set my CV out in terms of, what's the opposite to chronological order? You know what I mean? I set it out in newest to then oldest, so they know what I've done recently at the top. You don't need to sit there and go, this role really opened my eyes and told me a lot about the industry and I had a really good time. No. I normally just talk about the experiences that I've had, and then I quantify that with any numbers. So for example, I worked in X team, I made a 40-page report that reduced rates by 12%. That's what you want. You want to quantify it and say what you did and what the impact of that was in as little sentences as possible. If it's a big paragraph, they won't read it. And if you can't quantify it, if it's something like volunteer experience where you've just worked there for X amount of time and served tea or helped people or whatever it is, just put that. Really, a CV should be 1 to 2 pages maximum, and realistically, when you're starting out, one page will probably be sufficient because you won't have enough experience to fill 2 pages, and if you do, it's probably not all relevant. And also the about me section, don't just put in there like, I like going out and getting smashed at the weekend. Like, that's not relevant. I use the skills that aren't included in my education or in my experience section, as I said, like language skills or first aid qualifications or driving license, learning instruments, things like that are relevant. Or maybe you want to talk about any sport that you do or any challenges you've done. If you've run a marathon, that's where to put it, because it shows who you are as a person, but it's also like sensible hobbies. It shows them that you have more strings to your bow than just I've done work experience and I have that grade, because so many applicants will already have that. The end section is kind of what sets you apart and shows them whether you're disciplined or you have creative skills in other areas. Now, the best way to improve your CV once you have it written is to go to CV workshops. If you're at school, college or university, they will do CV workshops. I went to a few back in the day and they are super helpful, but it always helps to go to these events when you already have your CV. Now, when I was at law school, they had CV workshops from the Central Careers University Hub. They offer like blanket advice for just generally graduate schemes, but if you want something specific to your field, then you might have an employability tutor like we did within the actual law school, or just go to somebody who works in that field. So if you don't have an employability tutor, go to your personal advisor or your academic tutor or somebody that works in your department, show them your CV and see if they'll help you with it, basically, because they've got a job in the field, so they'll know what to look for and know what to include more than you will. Once you have it written, show it to as many people as possible and get advice from them, get them to read it. There might be spelling mistakes, there might be things you can write more concisely, there might be things they think are relevant or aren't relevant included, and just ask them generally, like, how does this read? Does it read okay? Are you bored when you're reading it? Can I make it more punchy? Can I make it flow better? Those type of things are what you want to kind of look for and ask them, even if you just show your parents or siblings or friends that you might have. And yeah, fundamentally, once you have that, then just send it off to as many people as you want to send it off to, and always ask for feedback as well. If you do any schemes and you don't get it, always ask them for feedback, because a lot of the time it can just be simple things like a CV or a cover letter fix, especially if they're the only things that you're applying with and you're not applying for an application. So always ask for feedback, tailor it to the industry, and get as many people as to read it as possible, and good luck, basically, for the CV. This is my CV. I'm just going to put it quickly on screen. So as you can see, it kind of got the education at the top, awards that I've won, competitions that I've won, also within like university, and the grades that I got. Then it moves on to the experience that I have, and then it goes on to the volunteer experience that's relevant, but I'll only include volunteer experience if it is relevant. And then at the end, as you can see, it's just my extracurricular section, and that's how my CV reads. So you can pause that if you actually want to read it and kind of gain some ideas. I mean, CV is not something that you can really copy, so don't copy it because it's my experiences. But I mean, you can kind of mimic the layout and things like that if you want to, and see how I have broken down the roles that I've done into manageable chunks that make it relevant to the job role. Now, for covering letters. So covering letters, I always think, are seen as something that's quite daunting, when in actuality, they're quite easy to kind of write. So the way I write it is I always address it to the person. If you don't know who the person is, find out. It's just not the same when you put like, to whom it may concern. There are some cases, obviously, where you'll have to do that if it's just like a blanket, you know, admin email and you don't know who it's going to, or it's going to a team. But if you can try and put the actual name of the person, then I always do, you know, pleasantries like I hope you're well, you know, thank you for the application, like that type of thing. Then I go into what I'm applying for, why I should be chosen for that position, and I outline the experience that I have related back to the specific role and why my skill set will be so good in that role. And then I also go into skills a bit more in depth, things that I've learned, any courses I've been on that are directly relevant, or any, you know, certificates and things like that I have that are directly relevant to the role and why they would be useful. And then that's pretty much it. I normally just wrap it up with, you know, I will relish the opportunity, look forward to hearing from you, all the best, Chelsea. That's pretty much how I wrap it up. As I said, they're very short, only 2 to 3 paragraphs, couple hundred words maximum. You don't want it long because obviously this is as part of an application, it's not the full application, so really they're just probably going to skim this. This should still be pristine, it should still be grammatically correct, because it is a representation of who you are, and if it is not any of those things, then they will think that you're lazy or that you're slacking, and it will basically make a bad representation of who you are. And really the covering letter should be tailored to the company, and it should not repeat what it is in your CV. Now, you want to expand on what you've put on your CV. You don't just want to say, I'll be good for the role because I've had 3 jobs in that industry before, because they can see that on your CV. You want to go into more detail and explain any experiences that you've had or times that you've excelled, and then quantify that with actual numbers to say percentages or sales figures or hours put in or revenue made, things like that, to basically show what you've actually done and with what you've actually done within those roles that you probably won't necessarily have room for on the CV, and link it directly to the job role so they can read it and go, they're a good fit. And that's pretty much my tips for the covering letter. Here is a typical covering letter that I would write. Here's the one that I wrote for when I applied to Clip a Chance and got it. As you can see, it's relatively short. It's just me addressing it to the recruiter and then talking about things that I've done within my first year of university, where I'm at now in my education, why I'd be a good fit for the scheme, and pretty much ending it off. It's quite a short and sweet covering letter. If you'd like to read it again, you can just pause it on screen and get a feel for what I've written. And obviously, again, this is very personal, so you can't copy what somebody else has written, but you can get a sense for the style of how I've written it. So I hope this video was helpful. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any questions or comments about CVs, covering letters, if you want to share some of your own advice, then please do so in the comments below. I hope you liked this video. I will see you guys next time. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye.